The fluorescent lights in Ward C had been flickering for 3 days straight, casting stuttering shadows across the linoleum that made everything feel unstable, impermanent. I'd worked the overnight shift at Riverside Psychiatric Hospital for 6 years, and I'd learned to read the small signs that indicated when a night would be routine and when it would be something else entirely. The flickering lights were a sign, though not the supernatural kind. They meant maintenance was understaffed again, that budget cuts were showing in the infrastructure, that we were all operating in a system held together by threadbare protocols and exhausted staff. It was 2:47 a.m. when I heard Alden Yarborough speaking in his room. Not shouting or crying out, which would have been cause for immediate intervention, but speaking in a steady, measured tone, as if reading aloud. I paused outside his door, checking the observation window first, following protocol. Alden was sitting upright on his bed, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the blank wall opposite him. His lips were moving, forming words with careful precision. Alden had been admitted 4 days earlier following a psychotic break at his workplace. He was a 42-year-old accountant, divorced, no children, with no prior psychiatric history. According to the intake notes, he'd been found in his office at 3 a.m, naked except for his socks, rearranging client files into patterns on the floor while insisting he could see the hidden connections between them. The police had been kind enough not to press charges, and his employer had been understanding enough to suggest psychiatric care rather than termination. I opened the door quietly, keeping my movements slow and predictable. Patients in acute psychosis could startle easily, and the last thing I wanted was to trigger an aggressive episode. "Alden," I said softly, "it's Nurse Marin. Are you having trouble sleeping?" He didn't turn to look at me, but his lips stopped moving. For a long moment he sat perfectly still, and I could see his chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths. Then, without shifting his gaze from the wall, he said, "Page 17, paragraph 3. The patient demonstrates persistent delusional ideation focused on perceived patterns in numerical data. Recommend continued observation and possible adjustment to antipsychotic medication regimen." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Those words sounded like they could have come from a psychiatric evaluation, the kind of clinical language doctors used in patient files. "What are you reading, Alden?" "I'm not reading," he said, his voice still eerily calm. "I'm remembering, page 17, paragraph 3. That's what Dr. Kincaid wrote about me yesterday. Would you like me to continue? Page 18 is particularly detailed about my supposed delusions." Dr. Honora Kincaid was one of our senior psychiatrists, and she had indeed evaluated Alden the previous afternoon. But her notes were confidential, locked in the secure filing system in the administrative office. Patients never saw their own psychiatric evaluations, at least not the raw clinical notes. Those were kept strictly within the treatment team. "Alden, you couldn't have seen Dr. Kincaid's notes. They're locked away." He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were clear, focused, completely lucid. "I know they are. I can see them anyway. Would you like me to tell you what else is in that locked cabinet? There are 37 patient files in there right now, not counting mine. Shall I describe them?" I should have called for backup right then. This kind of grandiose delusion, the belief in impossible knowledge, could be a sign of escalating psychosis. But something in his tone stopped me. He didn't sound manic or agitated. He sounded tired, resigned, as if he were admitting to something he'd tried hard to conceal. "Tell me about one of them," I said, pulling up the chair and sitting down, maintaining a safe distance. I wanted to assess how detailed this delusion was, whether it was random confabulation or something more structured. "File 23, he said immediately. "Greta Larkspur. admitted 6 days ago for severe anxiety and insomnia. She reports hearing sounds inside her walls at night, specifically at 3:17 a.m. The consulting psychiatrist, Dr. Royce Halden, noted possible auditory hallucinations but suspects the patient may be manufacturing symptoms to avoid returning home. There's a note at the bottom, underlined twice, that says, "Query domestic situation." Greta Larkspur was a real patient, 2 doors down from Alden's room. She'd been admitted before him, and I knew she had reported hearing strange sounds, though I didn't know the specific time. And Dr. Halden had indeed been concerned about her home environment. But these were details that wouldn't be common knowledge on the ward. "How do you know about Greta?" I asked carefully. Alden sighed and looked back at the wall. "I don't know how I know. I just do. When I'm in a building, I can see everything written inside it. Every document, every note, every file. They appear in my mind like I'm reading them, even when they're locked away or in rooms I've never been in. It started 3 weeks ago. That's why I was at my office in the middle of the night. I was trying to understand it, to organize the information somehow, but there's so much, Nurse Marin, so much writing everywhere, and I can't turn it off." This was more elaborate than simple psychosis. Patients with delusional disorders often believed they had special abilities, but they usually couldn't provide specific verifiable details. I made a mental note to check with Dr. Halden about Greta's file, to see if Alden's description was accurate. "I'm going to let you try to get some sleep," I said, standing slowly. "But Alden, I need you to promise you'll use your call button if you start feeling overwhelmed. Can you do that for me?" "Page 42, he said softly, not looking at me. "That's your employee file. You've been here 6 years, 4 months, and 9 days. You were hired straight out of nursing school because they were short-staffed. You requested the night shift specifically because, and I quote, "I do better in environments with reduced stimulation and clear routines." You've never called in sick, not once. And there's a note from your supervisor, Evelyn Caro, recommending you for a leadership training program. My hand froze on the doorknob. Everything he'd just said was accurate. I had specifically requested nights for exactly that reason. And Evelyn had mentioned something about a training program last month, though she'd asked me to keep it quiet until the paperwork was finalized. "You need to stop now, Alden," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't helping your recovery." "I know," he whispered. "But I can't stop seeing it. Every file, every document, every word written in this entire building. It's all there, in my head, like a library I never asked to visit." I left his room and went directly to the nurse's station, my hands shaking slightly as I logged into the computer system. I pulled up Greta Larkspur's file and found Dr. Halden's most recent evaluation. There, in his notes from 2 days ago, was the exact quote Alden had recited. "Query domestic situation," underlined twice. The administrative office didn't open until 8 a.m., but I had the number for Tobias Reddick, the night security supervisor. I called him from the landline, keeping my voice low. "Tobias, this is Marin in Ward C. I need you to do something unusual. Can you check the access logs for the admin file room? Specifically, I need to know if anyone's been in there in the last 24 hours. Tobias was a 15-year veteran of hospital security, a calm presence who'd seen everything from attempted elopements to staff misconduct. He didn't question my request, just put me on hold while he checked his system. When he came back, his voice was puzzled. That's weird. The log shows the door was opened at 11:37 p.m., but there's no keycard registered. It's like someone opened it manually, but that door doesn't have a manual override. It's electronic only. Could it be a system glitch? Maybe. But the timestamp is clear. Door opened for approximately 4 minutes, then closed and locked again. No alarm triggered because it wasn't forced. It's like someone with authorization opened it, except there's no record of who. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. Alden had been in his room all night. I'd checked on him at 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m., and 2:47 a.m. He couldn't have physically gone to the administrative office, but the door had been opened at 11:37 p.m., right between my midnight rounds. The rest of the night shift passed slowly. I checked on Alden every 30 minutes, and each time I found him in the same position, sitting upright, staring at the wall, lips occasionally moving as if reading. At 6 a.m., when Dr. Kincaid arrived for morning rounds, I pulled her aside and explained what had happened. Dr. Kincaid was in her mid-50s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She'd worked in psychiatric medicine for nearly 30 years, and she approached unusual cases with a combination of clinical skepticism and genuine curiosity. "Let me understand," she said, reviewing my notes. The patient recited portions of his own file, another patient's file, and your employee file, all of which are locked in the administrative office. And security shows the file room door was accessed during the night with no record of who opened it. Yes, and everything he said was accurate. I verified it. She was quiet for a moment, tapping her pen against her notepad, a habit I'd noticed when she was thinking through a complex case. There are a few possibilities. 1, someone on staff accessed the files and shared information with the patient, either deliberately or inadvertently. 2, the patient somehow gained unauthorized access himself and is now pretending not to remember, which could be part of his psychotic presentation. 3, we're dealing with an extremely unlikely series of coincidences. Or 4, she paused, meeting my eyes, we're missing something fundamental about what's happening here. What do you mean, missing something? I mean that in 30 years of practice, I've learned that when patients present with symptoms that don't fit our established categories, we need to be open to possibilities beyond our current diagnostic framework. Not supernatural possibilities, she added quickly, seeing my expression, but perhaps neurological phenomena we don't yet fully understand. The human brain is capable of extraordinary things, especially under stress. We went to see Alden together. He was still awake, looking exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands. When Dr. Kincaid greeted him, he gave her a weary smile. "Dr. Kincaid, you're going to ask me to demonstrate, aren't you? To prove I can really see the files. Can you?" she asked, settling into the chair with her notepad ready. "Which file would you like? Pick any patient in this ward. Or better yet, pick a random page number from my file, and I'll tell you what's written there." Dr. Kincaid considered this. "Page 12 of your file. What does it say?" Alden closed his eyes, and I watched his pupils move rapidly beneath his eyelids, as if he were reading something invisible. Page 12, top of the page. Patient presents with acute onset of psychotic symptoms characterized by disorganized behavior and grandiose ideation. No prior psychiatric history, which is unusual for this severity of presentation. Differential diagnosis includes brief psychotic disorder, schizophreniform disorder, or possible substance-induced psychosis, though toxicology screens were negative. Then there's a medication note. Started on risperidone 2 mg BID with lorazepam 1 mg PRN for agitation. At the bottom, there's a handwritten addendum. Patient is unusually cooperative and maintains good insight into some aspects of his condition, which doesn't fit typical psychotic presentation. Recommend neurological consultation. Dr. Kincaid's face remained professionally neutral, but I saw her grip tighten on her pen. "That's accurate," she said quietly. "Word for word, including my handwritten note. How are you doing this, Alden?" "I don't know," he said. opening his eyes. They were wet with unshed tears. I've tried to figure it out. I've tried to stop it. But ever since it started, I can see written words through walls, through locked doors, through anything. At first, I thought I was remembering things I'd read before. But then I started seeing documents I'd never had access to, client files at work that were confidential, personal letters in my neighbor's house, and now, here, every patient file in this entire building. I can't escape it. Have you seen your own file in its entirety? Dr. Kincaid asked. Yes, including the parts you haven't shown me. Including the part where you're considering transferring me to a long-term facility if my symptoms don't improve in the next week. Dr. Kincaid was silent for a long moment. Then she said, I'm going to arrange for some additional testing, neurological scans, vision tests, possibly a consultation with a specialist in unusual perceptual phenomena. In the meantime, I'm not increasing your medication. I want to observe you as you are right now. Over the next 3 days, Alden underwent every test we could arrange. MRI scans, EEG, psychological assessments, even a visit from a neurologist who specialized in synesthesia and other unusual perceptual conditions. All the tests came back normal. His brain showed no abnormalities, no tumors or lesions, no indication of any physical cause for his claimed ability. But Alden continued to prove, again and again, that he could read documents he shouldn't have been able to access. He described the contents of sealed envelopes in the mailroom. He recited memos from the hospital administrator's office 3 floors away. He told Security Officer Miller Vance about a warning letter in his personnel file from 2 years ago, something Vance had never told anyone about. The staff began to react in different ways. Some were frightened, requesting not to be assigned to Alden's care. Others were skeptical, convinced there had to be a rational explanation, possibly an elaborate hoax involving hidden cameras or inside information. But those of us who worked with him directly, who saw the exhaustion in his eyes and the genuine distress his ability caused him, began to believe he was telling the truth. It was on the 7th night of his admission that things took a darker turn. I was doing my rounds when I found Alden standing at his window, forehead pressed against the glass, breathing heavily. Alden, what's wrong? I found something I wasn't supposed to find, he said, his voice shaking. Something someone has been hiding very carefully. Nurse Marin, do you know about the file that isn't in the cabinet? What file? The one that was removed 3 years ago. Patient 4499. It should be there, right between Silas Pendry's file and the administrative staffing documents, but it's missing. Except I can see where it used to be. I can see the impression it left, like a ghost imprint of words that were once there, and I can read them. Cold dread settled over me. Alden, maybe you should sit down. Patient 4499, he continued, ignoring me, his eyes fixed on something invisible in the distance. Ephraim Coldwell, admitted for paranoid delusions and violent ideation. But he wasn't delusional, was he? He knew things he shouldn't know, just like me. He told his nurses about confidential information, about things happening in parts of the hospital he'd never visited. And then one night, he disappeared from his locked room. No sign of forced exit, no explanation. The file was removed and destroyed. And there's a memo, sealed in a private safe in the director's office, that says, "Incident contained, no further investigation required." Alden, you need to stop. But here's the interesting part, he said, finally turning to look at me. His face was pale, almost gray in the fluorescent light. There's another file, a duplicate, hidden in the maintenance records. Someone made a copy before the original was destroyed. It's in the basement, in a box labeled Electrical Repairs 2021, and that file has more information. It has a list of everyone Ephraim told his secrets to, including their names and what happened to them afterward. What happened to them? 3 staff members requested transfers within a month. 2 quit entirely. 1, a nurse named Sarah Benedict, was found dead in her apartment 2 weeks after Ephraim's disappearance. The official cause was suicide, but there's a police report, buried in the file, that mentions unusual circumstances. Her apartment was locked from the inside, but there were signs that someone else had been there. And written on her bathroom mirror in soap were the words, "She read what I saw." I felt my mouth go dry. "Alden, how do you know all this?" "Because I can see the file, Nurse Marin, right now. I can see it sitting in that box in the basement. Every page, every word. And I can see something else, something written more recently. Someone has been adding notes to that file, documenting my case. There's a page dated yesterday that says, 'Patient demonstrates identical symptom presentation to Ephraim Coldwell. Recommend extreme caution and isolation protocols. Do not allow patient access to sensitive information.' It's signed by someone whose name I don't recognize, Dr. Royce Halden." Dr. Halden. I knew the name, of course. He was the psychiatrist who'd evaluated Greta Larkspur, but I'd never met him, never seen him on the ward. And now Alden was saying he'd been secretly documenting Alden's case, comparing it to a patient who'd mysteriously disappeared 3 years ago. "I need to make a phone call," I said, backing toward the door. "Wait," Alden said urgently. "There's more. The file in the basement, the hidden one, it has instructions. A protocol for what to do if another patient like Ephraim ever appeared. And Nurse Marin, those instructions, they don't end with treatment and discharge. They end with the word containment." I called Dr. Kincaid at home, something I'd never done before. When I explained what Alden had told me, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, she said, "Don't do anything. Don't discuss this with anyone else. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She arrived in 15, accompanied by Tobias from security. Together, we went to the basement, to the storage area where maintenance kept old equipment and supplies. It took us 40 minutes to locate the box labeled Electrical Repairs 2021, buried behind several filing cabinets. Inside, underneath a tangle of old wiring and tools, was a manila folder. Dr. Kincaid opened it with shaking hands. Inside were photocopies of patient records for Ephraim Coldwell, along with incident reports, staff interviews, and a final memo dated 3 years ago. Everything Alden had described was there, down to the last detail, including the protocol instructions, which ended with a series of steps for permanent isolation and observation that seemed to suggest a patient would be transferred to a facility that didn't officially exist. "This can't be real," Dr. Kincaid whispered. "We don't operate like this. We don't hide patient disappearances and create secret protocols." "Someone does," Tobias said grimly. He was reading through the staff interviews, his face growing darker with each page. "And according to this, they're still here. Look at the signature at the bottom of these recent editions." We looked. The notes documenting Alden's case were signed by Dr. Royce Halden, dated from the past week. But when Dr. Kincaid called the administrative office the next morning to inquire about Dr. Halden, they had no record of anyone by that name currently employed at the hospital. "We need to contact the medical board," Dr. Kincaid said, "and possibly law enforcement. This suggests a level of institutional misconduct that goes far beyond anything I've ever encountered." But when we returned to Ward C to check on Alden, his room was empty. The bed was neatly made, his personal belongings were gone, and his patient chart had been updated with a discharge summary, signed by Dr. Royce Halden, stating that Alden Yarborough had recovered sufficiently to be released to outpatient care. except none of us had approved his discharge, and security had no record of anyone leaving the ward during the night. We searched the entire hospital. We reviewed every camera feed, checked every exit, interviewed every staff member on duty. Alden Yarborough had simply vanished, just like Ephraim Coldwell before him. The investigation that followed was quietly contained. The medical board reviewed the hidden file and found multiple irregularities, but no definitive proof of wrongdoing. The police opened a missing persons case for Alden, but with no evidence of foul play, it eventually went cold. Dr. Kincaid tried to push for answers, but found herself meeting resistance at every level, administrative roadblocks and bureaucratic delays that seemed designed to frustrate her efforts. 3 months after Alden's disappearance, I found something on my final night shift before transferring to a different hospital. I was cleaning out my locker when I discovered an envelope tucked behind my spare uniform, an envelope I'd never seen before. Inside was a single page photocopied, with a message written in what looked like Alden's handwriting. Dear Nurse Marin, if you're reading this, then I either escaped or was moved. I wanted you to know the truth. The file in the basement. You found it, which means you were meant to find it. But did you look in the empty folder, the one that was supposed to hold Ephraim's original records? Because I saw something there that wasn't in the copy. I saw an addendum, dated just last week, with a list of names. Nurses who had discovered too much. Your name is third on the list, and at the bottom, there's a single sentence. Protocol requires containment of all witnesses to prevent information cascade. Check the folder again, Nurse Marin. Check what was always there but invisible until you knew to look, and then run. I wanted to believe it was a hoax, a cruel joke, or a manifestation of my own paranoia after months of stress. But that night I went back to the basement one final time, with a flashlight and a sense of dread that sat like ice in my stomach. The box was still there, but the folder had changed. Now there were additional pages added recently based on the pristine white paper. And there was my name, Marin Everly, followed by a detailed description of my work history, my habits, my routines. Below my entry were notes in a clinical hand. Subject has demonstrated excessive curiosity regarding Yarborough case. Recommend observation level 3. If information sharing is detected, escalate to Protocol 7. I didn't wait to find out what Protocol 7 entailed. I transferred hospitals the following week, moved to a different city, changed my phone number. I've never told anyone the full story of what happened with Alden Yarborough, not until now. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if there are others like him. People who can see through walls and locked doors, who can read words that were meant to stay hidden. And I wonder what happens to them when they see too much, when they discover secrets that someone has worked very hard to keep buried. I still work as a psychiatric nurse, but I never stay in one place for long. And I never, ever look too closely at locked files or sealed records. Because I learned from Alden Yarborough that some information carries a price. And sometimes the cost of knowing too much is simply disappearing into a gap in the records, a missing file, a case that was never officially closed. And every time I see a patient who seems to know things they shouldn't, who speaks of seeing words through walls or reading minds, I feel that old familiar chill. Because I know, even if I can't prove it, that somewhere there's a protocol with their name on it. And someone, in some office with no official existence, is deciding whether they've seen too much to be allowed to remain free. The last time I checked online, I found a news article about an accountant named Alden Yarborough who had died in a car accident 2 months after his disappearance from our hospital. Single vehicle collision, no witnesses, closed casket funeral. The obituary was brief, mentioning no surviving family, no close friends, nothing to suggest that this man had ever been anything more than an ordinary accountant who met an unfortunate end. But I remember him differently. I remember his exhausted eyes and his trembling hands as he described the endless library of hidden documents he was forced to read. I remember his fear when he discovered files that shouldn't exist and protocols designed to make problematic patients disappear. And sometimes, in moments of weakness, I find myself wishing I could see what he saw, if only for a moment. To look at the walls around me and read the secrets written on the other side, to know the truth that lies behind locked doors and sealed envelopes. But then I remember his warning, and I remember the list of names in that hidden file, and I remember that some truths are locked away for a reason, not to protect us from the knowledge, but to protect those who keep the secrets from being discovered. And I wonder, as I've wondered every day since Alden vanished, whether I'm free because I stopped looking, or whether I'm just another name on a list, waiting for my own protocol to be enacted when the time is right. The fluorescent lights are flickering again tonight, casting unstable shadows across my new workplace, and I can't help but think of Alden, sitting in his room, reciting the contents of locked files while someone, somewhere, wrote his name in a folder that would eventually be hidden in a basement box, waiting for the next nurse curious enough to find it. I'll transfer again soon, I always do, because the only thing I learned from Alden Yarborough that I know for certain is this. In some buildings, in some institutions, there are files that should never be read, and the people who can read them, whether through strange ability or simple persistence, have a tendency to become files themselves, locked away, marked confidential, and eventually removed from the cabinet entirely, as if they were never there at all. The night Greta Larkspur was admitted to Ward C, I was training a new nursing assistant named June Adair. June was fresh out of her certification program, eager and nervous in the way all new staff are when they first encounter psychiatric patients. I remember thinking that Greta would be a good case for her to observe. Someone who presented with anxiety and insomnia rather than acute psychosis or violent behavior. Simple, straightforward, nothing that would traumatize a newcomer to psychiatric nursing. I was wrong about the simple part. Greta arrived at 11:30 p.m., escorted by her husband, a thin man with worried eyes who kept his hand on her elbow as if she might collapse without his support. She was in her late 30s, dressed in expensive but wrinkled clothing, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had come partially undone. What struck me immediately was how exhausted she looked, not just tired but hollowed out, as if something essential had been slowly drained from her over time. "Mrs. Larkspur," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Marin Everly, the night nurse. We're going to get you settled and comfortable." Her handshake was cold and limp. "I haven't slept in 6 days," she said, her voice flat. "Not really slept. I close my eyes and I'm just about to drift off, and then I hear it. 3:17. Every night, 3:17. "Hear what at 3:17? I asked gently, noting the specificity of the time. "The clock," she said, meeting my eyes for the first time. There was something desperate in her gaze, a pleading quality that made me uncomfortable. "The clock behind my bedroom wall. It ticks all night, every night, and then at exactly 3:17 a.m. it stops. And when it stops, something else starts." Her husband shifted uncomfortably. "The doctors said it's anxiety manifesting as auditory hallucinations. She's been under a lot of stress at work, and we had a break-in at our house 2 months ago. Nothing was taken, but it shook her up. Since then, she's been hearing things." "It's not a hallucination," Greta said, her voice taking on an edge. "The clock is real. It's been there for 70 years, inside the wall, and nobody remembers putting it there. But it's there, ticking, counting down to 3:17, and when it stops," she broke off, shaking her head. "You'll think I'm crazy." "I won't. I said, and I meant it. After 6 years of psychiatric nursing, I'd learned that dismissing a patient's experiences, even delusional ones, only deepened their distress. "Tell me what happens when the clock stops." "Something is released," she whispered. "I don't know how else to describe it. It's like a presence, a weight in the air. And bad things happen. Small things, usually. A pipe bursts. The smoke alarm goes off for no reason. The power flickers, but it's always at 3:17, always within a few minutes of the clock stopping." June, standing beside me with her clipboard, made a note. I could see her trying to maintain a professional expression, but there was skepticism in the set of her jaw. She was thinking what I had thought when I was new, that this was clearly a delusional system, probably related to post-traumatic stress from the break-in. We got Greta settled in a room on the east wing, a quiet space away from the more acute patients. Her husband left after staying for the required visiting hours, and I could see the relief in his face as he escaped into the normal world where clocks didn't hide in walls, and 3:17 was just another minute of the night. "What do you think?" June asked me as we returned to the nurse's station. She seems pretty convinced about that clock. "Anxiety can manifest in very specific ways," I said, pulling up Greta's intake paperwork on the computer. "The specificity of the time, 3:17, suggests there might be some significance to that moment. Maybe something happened at that time during the break-in or during another traumatic event. Our job is to help her feel safe enough to sleep, and hopefully the hallucinations will decrease." But even as I said it, something nagged at me. The way Greta had described the clock, not as a sound she heard in her head, but as a physical object behind the wall, something that had been there for 70 years. There was a concrete quality to her delusion that felt different from typical auditory hallucinations. The first 2 hours of Greta's stay were uneventful. June and I checked on her every 30 minutes, and each time we found her lying in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't agitated or distressed, just awake, waiting. "Try to rest," I told her during the 2 a.m. check. "You're safe here. Whatever you've been hearing at home, it can't follow you here." She turned her head to look at me, and in the dim light of the room, her face was shadowed and strange. "Can't it? Clocks are everywhere, Nurse Marin. Time doesn't stop just because you change locations." At 3:10 a.m., I was at the nurse's station, reviewing medication schedules when I heard Greta call out. Not screaming, but a sharp, urgent voice. "Nurse, it's almost time!" June and I hurried to her room. Greta was sitting bolt upright in bed, her head tilted as if listening to something. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "The ticking. It's here. It followed me." I listened. The room was quiet except for the usual sounds of a hospital at night. Distant footsteps, the hum of ventilation, the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. "I don't hear anything unusual, Greta." "It's in the wall," she said, pointing at the wall behind her bed. "Right there, behind that panel. Listen." To humor her, I walked over to the wall and pressed my ear against it. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, very faintly, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound. Tick, tick, tick. I pulled back, frowning. "There's something ticking in there," I said to June. "Probably a pipe or some mechanical system." "It's the clock," Greta said. Her voice was oddly calm now, resigned. 2 minutes until it stops. You should leave the room. When it stops, something always happens." June looked at me uncertainly. I shook my head slightly, indicating we should stay. Whatever Greta believed was going to happen, I wanted to be there to provide reassurance when nothing did. We stood in that room, all three of us listening to the faint ticking from behind the wall, as the minutes crept toward 3:17. I found myself watching the digital clock on the wall monitor. watching the numbers change. 3:15. 3:16. At exactly 3:17, the ticking stopped. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the room in a dim red glow. And from somewhere down the hall, I heard a crash, followed by the sound of rushing water. "Stay with her," I told June, grabbing my flashlight and running toward the sound. The water was coming from the day room, pouring from a broken pipe in the ceiling. The pipe had burst cleanly, as if someone had cut through it, and water was flooding across the floor. I called maintenance immediately, then returned to Greta's room. She was still sitting up in bed, her face illuminated by the emergency lights. "I told you," she said quietly. 3:17, something always happens. "That was a coincidence," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Pipes burst in old buildings. It has nothing to do with a clock." "Keep telling yourself that," Greta said, lying back down. "You'll learn. Everyone who listens to the clock learns eventually." June and I spent the next hour helping maintenance contain the water damage while the power was restored. When we finally returned to the nurses' station, June was pale and shaken. "That was weird," she said. "The timing, I mean. Right at 3:17. "Coincidence," I repeated, more firmly this time. "Don't let the patient's delusions influence your perception of events." But over the next 3 nights, the coincidences continued. Each night at 3:17 a.m., something went wrong in the hospital. A fire alarm triggered by a short circuit. A medication cart's wheels locked up and it tipped over, spilling pills across the floor. A window cracked in an empty room, spider webbing across the glass with a sound like ice breaking. And each time, moments before the event, Greta would call out, "It's almost time, the clock is about to stop." By the 4th night, even June's skepticism was wavering. "How does she know?" she asked me as we prepared for the 3 a.m. rounds. "Even if it's all coincidence, how does she know exactly when something's going to happen?" "She's probably causing them somehow," I said, though I had no idea how a patient under constant observation could orchestrate mechanical failures throughout the hospital. Or she's just lucky at guessing. At exactly 3:17, 4 nights in a row, I didn't have an answer for that. Dr. Honora Kincaid came to evaluate Greta on the 5th day. I briefed her on the situation, including the strange incidents that had been occurring at 3:17 each morning. Dr. Kincaid listened with her usual calm attention, making notes in her precise handwriting. "Has anyone investigated the wall in her room?" she asked. "The one where she claims to hear the clock?" Maintenance looked at it briefly. They said it's just a standard interior wall, nothing unusual about the structure. But they didn't open it to look inside. No, there was no reason to. We assumed the ticking sound was from pipes or ventilation. Dr. Kincaid closed her notebook. "Let's indulge her delusion for a moment. If there really were a clock in that wall, how would it have gotten there? And why would it stop at exactly 3:17 every morning?" "There's no clock in the wall," I said. "That's impossible. Humor me. Check the architectural records for this building. Find out what was here before this wing was renovated. Maybe there's something in the history that we're missing." I spent my break that afternoon in the hospital's archives, a dusty basement room filled with filing cabinets containing decades of records. It took me 2 hours to find the architectural plans for Ward C, and when I did, I understood why Dr. Kincaid had insisted I look. The wing had been renovated 15 years ago, but before that, it had been part of the original hospital built in 1952. And according to the old floor plans, the room where Greta was staying had been something else entirely. an observation room with a two-way mirror. The wall, she claimed, contained the clock had been the wall with the mirror, and behind that wall had been a small observation chamber where staff could watch patients without being seen. I kept digging through the records and found something else. An incident report from 1954, 2 years after the hospital opened. A nurse named Dorothy Brennan had been found dead in the observation chamber behind room 7, which was now Greta's room. She had died at 3:17 a.m. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, but there were notes suggesting the circumstances had been unusual. The report mentioned that her watch had stopped at the exact time of death, and that several other clocks in the hospital had also stopped at 3:17 that morning. The observation chamber had been sealed during the renovation, walled over and forgotten. But according to the architectural plans, it was still there. A small space between the current room and the outer wall. A space that could potentially still contain furniture, equipment, or other items from 1954. Items like a wall clock. I brought the records to Dr. Kincaid, who reviewed them with growing interest. "This is remarkable," she said. "The patient has somehow fixated on a historically accurate detail about this room. The question is how? Has she been here before? Does she have any connection to this hospital's history?" I checked Greta's intake information. She had no prior admissions to our facility, and her medical records showed no previous psychiatric treatment anywhere. She worked as a real estate agent, had lived in the area her entire life, and had no apparent connection to the hospital or its past. "I want to show her these records," Dr. Kincaid said. "See how she reacts. Sometimes confronting a delusion with facts can help a patient begin to separate reality from their false beliefs." That evening, Dr. Kincaid and I sat down with Greta in a private consultation room. Dr. Kincaid spread out the architectural plans and the incident report on the table between us. "Mrs. Larkspur," she began, "Nurse Marin discovered something interesting about your room. There used to be an observation chamber behind that wall, sealed up during a renovation 15 years ago. And in 1954, a staff member died in that chamber at 3:17 in the morning." Greta looked at the documents, her face expressionless. "Dorothy Brennan," she said quietly. "She was 27 years old. She had just gotten engaged the week before she died, and she was the one who put the clock on the wall of the observation chamber, so she could keep track of her shift hours without disturbing the patients." Dr. Kincaid and I exchanged glances. "How do you know her name?" I asked. "It's not mentioned in the architectural plans, only in the incident report which we just found today." "Because she told me," Greta said. "The night after I was admitted here, I had a dream. Except it wasn't really a dream because I wasn't asleep. I was lying in bed, listening to the clock, and then at 3:17 when it stopped, I saw her. A woman in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, standing in the corner of my room. She said her name was Dorothy, and she said she'd been waiting a long time for someone who could hear the clock." "What else did she tell you?" Dr. Kincaid asked, her clinical demeanor cracking slightly with fascination. "She said that when she died, she was alone in that observation chamber, watching a patient who was having seizures. She was supposed to call for help, but she was paralyzed, couldn't move or speak. She tried to bang on the wall to alert someone, but no one heard. She died watching someone else suffer, unable to help. And her regret, her frustration, it somehow attached itself to the clock. Every night at 3:17, the moment of her death, the clock stops. And in that stopping, something breaks. A pipe, a window, a connection. It's like her inability to help, to fix things, manifests as small disasters. This is an elaborate delusion," Dr. Kincaid said, but she sounded uncertain. "A very detailed, historically consistent delusion." "It's not a delusion," Greta said. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her palm was cold and damp. Nurse Marin, you live alone, don't you? In a house on Maple Street, the blue one with the white trim? I pulled my hand back. How do you know where I live? Because Dorothy told me. She said she's been there, to your house. She said there's a broken doorbell that doesn't work properly, and it rings sometimes at 3:17 a.m. She said you've been woken up by it 3 times in the past month, and each time you go to the door but no one is there. You think it's an electrical problem, but it's not. It's Dorothy trying to tell you something. My blood went cold. Everything Greta had just said was true. My doorbell had been malfunctioning for weeks, ringing at odd hours, always around 3 in the morning. I'd assumed it was a short circuit, something to do with the old wiring in my house. I'd even called an electrician, but he hadn't found anything wrong. This conversation is over, I said, standing abruptly. You couldn't possibly know about my doorbell. She's trying to warn you, Greta called after me as I left the room. Something is wrong with your house, Nurse Marin. Something in the walls. Dorothy can see it, and she's trying to tell you before it's too late. I didn't sleep well that day. I kept thinking about Greta's words, about the doorbell, about the specificity of her knowledge. When I woke up in the afternoon, I did something I'd been putting off for weeks. I went into my basement to check the wiring. My house was old, built in the 1940s, and the basement was a maze of old pipes and electrical conduits. I'd always avoided going down there, uncomfortable with the musty smell and the shadows cast by the single overhead bulb. But now, with Greta's warning echoing in my mind, I forced myself to conduct a thorough inspection. It took me an hour to find it. Behind a stack of storage boxes tucked into a corner where the foundation met the floor joists was a section of electrical wire that had been partially chewed through by rodents. The insulation was stripped away, and the bare copper wire was exposed, touching a metal water pipe. It was a fire hazard, a potentially deadly situation that could have caused an electrical fire at any time. The fact that it had only been causing the doorbell to ring was a small miracle. Another few weeks, and the damage could have been catastrophic. I called an electrician immediately and had the wiring replaced. But as I watched him work, I couldn't shake the feeling that Greta had been right. That somehow, impossibly, a woman who had died 70 years ago in a hospital observation chamber had been trying to warn me about a danger in my home. When I returned to work that night, I went straight to Greta's room. She was awake, sitting up in bed, that same exhausted look on her face. "You found it," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, but I don't understand how you knew, how Dorothy knew." "She can see through walls," Greta said simply. "Or maybe she is the walls. I don't fully understand it myself. But when the clock stops at 3:17, when that moment of her death comes around each night, she becomes visible. And she can see things, know things about the spaces she touches. She's been trying to help people for 70 years, but most people can't hear her. They just notice small disasters at 3:17 and write them off as coincidence." "Why you?" I asked. "Why can you hear the clock when no one else can?" Greta was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother worked here," she finally said. "In the 1950s. She was a nurse in this ward. She knew Dorothy Brennan. They were friends. When Dorothy died, my grandmother quit her job. She never talked about why, but I found her journal after she passed away. She wrote about Dorothy's death, about how she heard the clock in the observation chamber stop at 3:17, and how she knew, somehow, that Dorothy was gone. She wrote that she could feel Dorothy's presence in the hospital after that, especially in room 7. She wrote that the room was haunted, not by a ghost in the traditional sense, but by a moment in time that kept repeating. "And you inherited this sensitivity from your grandmother?" "I don't know. Maybe. or maybe anyone could hear it if they listened carefully enough. But most people don't want to listen. They don't want to know that time isn't as linear as we pretend, that moments can echo, that deaths can leave impressions that persist for decades. Dr. Kincaid was called in for another consultation, and this time she brought a surprise, an architectural engineer who specialized in historical buildings. Together, we made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. We decided to open the wall. Maintenance came in during the day shift, when Greta was in group therapy. They carefully removed a section of drywall from the wall behind her bed, revealing the sealed observation chamber beyond. The space was exactly as the architectural plans had shown it. A narrow room, perhaps 6 feet wide, with a small desk and chair still positioned facing what had once been the two-way mirror. And on the wall, still hanging in place after 70 years, was a clock. It was an old-fashioned round clock with a white face and black numbers, the kind that had been common in hospitals in the 1950s. The glass cover was dusty, and the hands were frozen in place, stopped at 3:17. "It's really here," June whispered. She had come down to watch the wall being opened, drawn by the same morbid curiosity that had infected all of us. "The clock is actually real." The engineer examined it carefully. "The mechanism is broken," he said. "Has been for decades by the look of it. This clock hasn't ticked in years." "Then what have we been hearing?" I asked. He pointed to a pipe running through the wall, just inches from the clock. "This water pipe has a small leak, very slow, just a drip. The sound of water hitting metal at regular intervals could create a ticking sound. And the leak has likely been getting worse over time, which is why you've been experiencing plumbing problems at odd hours." "At 3:17, I said. "Well, yes, if the leak has reached a critical pressure point, it would make sense for the pipe to fail at a predictable time each night, when water usage patterns in the hospital shift. Around 3 a.m. is typically when the building's water pressure changes as people start waking up and using facilities." It was a rational explanation, a perfectly logical series of coincidences and mechanical failures. But it didn't explain how Greta had known about my doorbell, or how she had known Dorothy Brennan's name, or how she had described the contents of the observation chamber before we opened it. Dr. Kincaid had the clock removed and brought to Greta's room. She placed it on the table beside the bed and asked Greta to look at it. "Is this the clock you've been hearing?" she asked. Greta reached out and touched the dusty glass cover, her fingers leaving marks in the accumulated grime. "Yes," she said. "But it's not the clock itself that's important. It's what it represents. A moment frozen in time, a death that couldn't be prevented. A helper who couldn't help. That's what stops at 3:17. Not the mechanical device, but the weight of that moment." "The engineers found a leaking pipe behind the wall," Dr. Kincaid said gently. "That's what you've been hearing, not a clock. And the timing of the plumbing problems can be explained by water pressure changes in the building. There's a rational explanation for everything that's been happening." "Then how did I know about Nurse Marin's doorbell?" Greta asked. "How did I know about Dorothy Brennan? How did I know what was in that sealed room?" Dr. Kincaid had no answer for that. None of us did. Greta was discharged after 2 weeks. Her sleep patterns improved with medication and therapy. The night before she left, she asked to speak with me privately. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Dorothy came to me again last night, after they removed the clock. She said thank you. She said that someone finally listening to her, finally acknowledging what happened, had released something. Some tension that had been building for 70 years. She said the clock won't stop anymore, not at 3:17, not ever. The moment has finally passed." "Do you still hear the ticking?" I asked. "No," Greta said, and for the first time since her admission she smiled. "It's quiet now. finally quiet. After Greta left, the incidents at 317 stopped. No more burst pipes, no more electrical failures, no more broken windows. The hospital returned to its normal rhythms, and the nurses who had worked through those strange 2 weeks gradually convinced themselves that it had all been coincidence and confirmation bias. But I knew better, because my doorbell never rang at 3 a.m. again after that night when we opened the wall, and because I had done some research of my own into Dorothy Brennan, the nurse who had died in the observation chamber. I found her obituary in an old newspaper archive. It mentioned that she had been engaged to be married, just as Greta had said. It mentioned that she had been a dedicated nurse who had worked the night shift in the psychiatric ward. And it mentioned, in a brief final line, that she had died suddenly while on duty, and that several staff members had reported their watches stopping at the moment of her death. But the most disturbing part was what I found in my grandmother's belongings. My grandmother had also been a nurse, though she'd worked at a different hospital. Going through her old papers after she died, I found a photograph, a group of nurses at a training seminar in 1953. And there, standing in the back row, was a young woman whose name was written on the back of the photo. Dorothy Brennan. My grandmother had known her. They had trained together, though they'd ended up working at different facilities. And my grandmother had mentioned once, when I was considering nursing school, that I should avoid working night shifts if possible. Time behaves differently at night, she had said, especially around 3 in the morning. That's when the walls are thinnest. I hadn't understood what she meant then, but I do now. I still work the night shift at Riverside Psychiatric Hospital. The room that used to be Greta's has been renovated, the wall properly sealed, the observation chamber permanently closed off. The old clock is in storage somewhere, its hands forever frozen at 3:17. But sometimes, during my rounds, when I pass by that room in the quiet hours before dawn, I pause and listen. Not for ticking, not anymore, but for something else. For the echo of a moment that repeated for 70 years. For the presence of a helper who couldn't help, whose frustration manifested as small disasters, whose death left an impression that persisted long after the mechanical clock stopped working. And I think about Greta, who came to us complaining of a clock that wouldn't let her sleep. Who was the first person in decades to truly listen to what the clock was saying? Who heard, in that rhythmic ticking, a message that had been waiting 70 years to be received? Time isn't as simple as we pretend. Moments don't just pass and disappear. Sometimes they echo. Sometimes they repeat. And sometimes, if you listen carefully enough in the quiet hours of the night, you can hear them ticking away, counting down to the instant when everything stopped and will stop again, forever approaching but never quite reaching the moment after 3:17. The walls are thinnest at night, my grandmother said. And she was right. In those hours when most of the world sleeps, when the boundary between one day and the next grows uncertain, strange things can slip through. Not ghosts exactly, not hauntings in any traditional sense, but impressions, echoes, moments that refuse to end, and all it takes is someone willing to listen to hear them. Ephraim Coldwell arrived on a Wednesday morning, which was unusual in itself. Most psychiatric admissions came through the emergency room at night, during those dark hours when mental illness reached its crisis points and families finally admitted they could no longer cope. But Ephraim came during the day shift, transferred from County General after what the paperwork called an incident requiring specialized care. I was finishing up my night shift when they brought him in, already running late for my drive home, but curious enough about the new admission to linger. Dr. Royce Halden, who rarely handled intake cases personally, was accompanying him, which suggested this was something out of the ordinary. Ephraim was in his mid-50s, with silver hair cut military short, and the kind of lean, watchful posture that suggested either former law enforcement or military service. His eyes moved constantly, tracking everything in the hallway, reading name badges, noting exit locations. But what was most striking was his lips. They moved, almost continuously in tiny, barely perceptible motions, as if he were speaking to himself or reading something invisible. "Nurse Everly," Dr. Halden said, spotting me at the nurse's station. "Good, you're still here. I'd like you to observe this intake. Your shift notes will be valuable for the night staff." We settled Ephraim in room 12, which was at the end of the hallway, isolated from the other patient rooms. Dr. Halden conducted the initial interview while I took notes, and within the first 5 minutes, I understood why he'd wanted me there. "Mr. Coldwell," Dr. Halden began, "can you tell me why you were brought to County General?" Ephraim's eyes focused on the doctor, and his lips stopped their constant movement. "I told the police what the woman in the apartment next to mine was saying. Everything she was saying. Even though I couldn't hear her voice, even though the walls were concrete and soundproofed. I told them she was planning to kill her husband, told them the exact words she was using, the exact time she planned to do it. And when they investigated, they found I was right. Every word was accurate. They found the poison she'd already purchased, the life insurance policy she'd taken out, everything." "And how did you know what she was saying?" "I read her lips," Ephraim said simply. "Through the wall. I can see through walls now, not clearly, but clearly enough to see faces, to see mouths moving, and I can read what they're saying. Every word, even in a whisper. Especially in a whisper." Dr. Halden made a note. "When did this ability start?" 3 months ago. I was in a car accident, hit from behind at a stoplight. Minor concussion, no serious injuries. But when I came home from the hospital, something had changed. I could see shadows through walls, vague shapes of people in adjacent apartments, in passing cars, in buildings across the street. At first, I thought it was just after images, some kind of visual disturbance from the concussion. But then I realized I could make out details, facial features, hand gestures, and lip movements. "You understand, this sounds like a delusional belief," Dr. Halden said gently. "I know how it sounds, but I proved it to the police. I told them everything my neighbor said during a phone conversation with her sister planning the murder. I even told them about the grammatical error she made saying he don't instead of he doesn't. When they questioned her, they found the recording of that phone call on her phone. Every word matched what I'd told them. They couldn't explain how I knew, so they sent me here instead." Dr. Halden assigned Ephraim to my observation list, which meant I'd be checking on him regularly throughout my extended shift. The day nurse who was supposed to relieve me had called in sick, and I'd agreed to stay on for a double, which meant I'd be there to watch Ephraim through both day and night cycles. The first sign that something was genuinely unusual came during lunch. Ephraim was in his room, door closed, while in the adjacent room, another patient named Naomi Whitcomb was having a session with her therapist. The walls between patient rooms were solid, designed to provide privacy and sound insulation. You couldn't hear conversations from the next room unless someone was shouting. I was walking past Ephraim's door when I heard him speak, his voice calm but clear. She's telling him about the fire. She says she didn't start it on purpose, but she watched it burn for 3 minutes before calling 911. She says she's not sure why she waited. I opened Ephraim's door. He was sitting on his bed, facing the wall that separated his room from Naomi's, his eyes tracking something I couldn't see. "Mr. Coldwell, you need to respect other patients' privacy." He turned to look at me, and his expression was tired, almost apologetic. I'm not trying to invade anyone's privacy, Nurse Everly. I can't help what I see. The therapist just asked her why she waited to call for help. She's about to say it's because she was in shock, but that's not true. The real reason is written on her face. She wanted to make sure the fire was bad enough that they couldn't save the house. She wanted it destroyed. I should have dismissed this as delusion, as Ephraim elaborating on his false belief system. But something in his tone made me uneasy. I made a note to discreetly ask Naomi's therapist about the session, just to verify. When the therapist emerged 20 minutes later, I pulled him aside. Without violating confidentiality, can you tell me if Naomi discussed a fire during your session? The therapist, a young man named Marcus who'd only been with us for 6 months, looked surprised. Yes, actually. She admitted for the first time that she'd witnessed the fire at her rental property for several minutes before calling emergency services. Why do you ask? And did she say anything about wanting the house destroyed? His surprise deepened to concern. She didn't say it directly, but that was my clinical impression, yes. The house had significant problems, code violations that would have been expensive to fix. Insurance payout was more attractive than repairs. How did you know? I didn't answer. I couldn't explain that the patient in the next room had been narrating the session in real time, reading lips through a solid wall. Over the next several hours, Ephraim demonstrated his supposed ability again and again. He told me that security guard Miller Vance, who was stationed at the end of the hallway, was on the phone with his daughter, discussing her college tuition problems. He said Miller had just told her he couldn't afford to help because his own medical bills were too high. When I discreetly checked with Miller later, he confirmed the conversation, looking puzzled about how I could have known. Ephraim told me that Dr. Halden was in his office, reviewing patient files and talking to himself, rehearsing how to tell a patient's family that their son wasn't responding to treatment. He quoted Dr. Halden word for word, including a phrase where the doctor had said, "Damn it, I thought we'd finally found the right medication combination." When I carefully asked Dr. Halden later if he'd been reviewing any particularly difficult cases that afternoon, he mentioned the patient whose family was waiting for progress updates. "I'm going to have to tell them tomorrow that we're starting over with a new treatment plan. I've been trying to find the right way to phrase it." "Were you talking to yourself while reviewing the files?" I asked. He looked embarrassed. "I have a habit of rehearsing difficult conversations aloud. Helps me refine the message." "Why?" Again, I didn't answer, but the unease I felt was growing into something approaching fear. The real problem started that evening, around 9 p.m. I was conducting routine checks when Ephraim called me into his room. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking. "Nurse Everly, I need to tell you something, but I don't know how you'll react." "What is it?" "I can see you," he said. "Not just when you're in this room. I can see you through the walls when you're at the nurse's station, when you're in the medication room, when you're in the staff bathroom. And I can read your lips. I know what you say to the other nurses. I know what you say when you think no one is listening." My stomach went cold. "Mr. Coldwell, you're not supposed to." "I know I'm not supposed to. I'm trying not to. I try to look away, to focus on something else, but I can't control what I see. And I need to tell you this because what I saw earlier, what you said to June when you thought you were alone, I think you need to know that your secret is visible." June Adair was a nursing assistant I'd been training, and earlier that evening, I'd confided in her about something personal, something I hadn't told anyone else at the hospital. My sister was dying of cancer, and I'd been handling it by throwing myself into work, by maintaining perfect professional composure while falling apart inside. I'd told June because I'd needed someone to know, needed someone to understand why I'd been taking on extra shifts, Why I couldn't bear to go home to an empty house where I'd have nothing to do but think about watching my sister die. "What did you hear me say?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ephraim's eyes filled with tears. "You said, I don't know how to be a good sister and a good nurse at the same time. If I'm here, I'm failing her. If I'm there, I'm failing my patients. But at least here, people get better sometimes. At least here, I feel useful." He paused, wiping at his eyes. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't know that. I wish I didn't. But I need you to understand that I'm not trying to invade your privacy. I just can't turn it off." I left his room and went to the staff bathroom, where I locked myself in a stall and cried silently for 5 minutes. Not just because Ephraim had invaded an intensely private moment, but because I now had to confront the possibility that he was telling the truth, that somehow, impossibly, he could see through walls and read lips. When I'd composed myself, I went to find Dr. Halden. He was in his office, and when I explained what had happened, his expression shifted from concern to something more complex. He pulled out a file from his locked drawer, one of the old patient records that were kept in his personal storage. "I need to show you something," he said. "This case predates your time here, but it's relevant. 10 years ago, we had a patient with similar claims. He said he could see through walls after a severe head trauma. We dismissed it as delusional, treated him with antipsychotics, and discharged him after 6 weeks. 2 months later, he was found dead in his apartment. Suicide. He left a note saying he couldn't live with seeing everything, knowing everything, being unable to give people their privacy. Why are you telling me this? Because I made a mistake with that patient. I treated the symptom without trying to understand if there might be something genuinely unusual happening, and I've regretted it for 10 years. He closed the file. I don't know if Ephraim really can see through walls. It seems impossible, but I can't explain how he knows things he shouldn't know, and I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. We decided to conduct a controlled test. The next morning, Dr. Halden arranged for a colleague from another department to have a conversation in a conference room 2 floors below Ephraim's room. The room was soundproofed for privacy, and Ephraim had no way of knowing it was being used or by whom. During the test, I sat with Ephraim in his room while Dr. Halden monitored the conversation below. Ephraim was instructed to tell me anything he could see happening elsewhere in the building. He closed his eyes, and his lips began moving again in that constant, involuntary way. After a moment, he spoke. "There are 2 people on the 2nd floor, in a room with a long table. One is a woman in a blue jacket, the other is a man in a white coat. The woman is crying. She's saying, 'I can't do this anymore. I can't watch him deteriorate and pretend everything is fine.' The man is reaching across the table, holding her hand. He's saying, 'You don't have to pretend, not with me.'" I wrote down everything Ephraim said, noting the time and his exact words. When Dr. Halden came back upstairs an hour later, he compared my notes to a recording of the conversation. Every word was accurate. The woman had been a nurse from oncology, discussing her burnout and compassion fatigue. The man had been a counselor offering support. Ephraim couldn't have known about that conversation. There was no way for him to have overheard it, no way to have been informed about it. But he had described it perfectly, down to the color of the woman's jacket and the gesture of the man holding her hand. "This shouldn't be possible," Dr. Halden said, staring at the comparison. "But I can't explain it any other way. He's seeing something we can't see." The hospital administration was notified, and a team of researchers was brought in. They were skeptical at first, proposing various explanations involving cold reading, lucky guesses, or elaborate hoaxes. But after a week of controlled tests, they couldn't deny the results. Ephraim could consistently describe conversations happening in other rooms, sometimes on other floors, with accuracy that exceeded any statistical probability of chance. But the testing took a toll on him. Each day, he grew more exhausted, more withdrawn. The constant awareness of other people's private moments, their secrets, their pain, was wearing him down. "I can't escape it," he told me one night during my rounds. "Every moment I'm surrounded by words. Words from the next room, words from the floor above, words from the parking lot outside. Everyone's private conversations, their lies, their confessions, their moments of weakness. I know things about people they've never told anyone, and I can't unhear it, I can't unsee it. Is there anything that helps? Any way to reduce the input? Darkness helps a little. If I can't see the shapes, I can't read the lips. But I can still see them in my mind, these ghost images of faces talking, always talking. And the worst part is knowing things about people that they don't want anyone to know. Things that aren't my business, that I have no right to witness." He paused, then looked directly at me. "Like your conversation with Dr. Halden yesterday, when you thought you were alone in his office. When you asked him if you should take a leave of absence to be with your sister. When he told you that running from grief won't make it hurt less." I felt my face flush. That conversation had been private, intensely personal. And now Ephraim, who I was supposed to be helping, had witnessed it through walls and floors, had seen me at my most vulnerable. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I'm so sorry. But you should know that he's right. I see a lot of people in this building, hear a lot of conversations. And the people who run from their pain, who try to outwork their grief, they're the ones who break the hardest when they finally stop." Over the next week, Ephraim's condition deteriorated. The constant input of information, the inability to give people privacy, began manifesting as severe anxiety and insomnia. He stopped eating properly, lost weight, developed a tremor in his hands. The research team wanted to continue their studies, but Dr. Halden made the difficult decision to prioritize Ephraim's well-being over scientific curiosity. "We're stopping the tests," he announced. "This is causing genuine harm, and we're physicians first, researchers second." But even without formal testing, Ephraim couldn't stop seeing, couldn't stop knowing. And the things he saw began to change him in ways that went beyond physical exhaustion. He started telling people things they needed to hear, things he'd witnessed in their private moments. He told a patient that her husband, who visited daily and proclaimed his love, was planning to divorce her the moment she was discharged, had already filled the papers. He'd seen the husband on his phone in the parking lot, discussing it with his lawyer. He told a nurse that her teenage son, who she believed was at basketball practice every afternoon, was actually meeting with a drug dealer. He'd seen her having a phone conversation with her son, watched her lips form trusting words while not seeing what Ephraim could see. The boy's face in another part of the building, talking to a friend, planning his next purchase. He told Dr. Halden that one of the psychiatrists on staff was having an affair with the patient's family member, had seen them in a hospital storage closet, their mouths forming words of desire and deceit. It was a serious ethics violation, one that could cost the psychiatrist his license. Each revelation was accurate. Each piece of information was verified. And each time Ephraim shared what he'd seen, he looked more haunted, more burdened by the weight of unwanted knowledge. "I'm destroying lives," he told me one night. "Not intentionally, but effectively. People deserve their privacy, their secrets, their small hypocrisies and hidden shames. I'm taking that away from them, exposing everything, and I can't stop." The staff began avoiding him, uncomfortable with the idea that their every private moment might be observed and reported. Conversations in the break room dried up when people remembered that Ephraim could be watching from 2 floors away. Whispered gossip stopped. Even the casual, harmless secrets that lubricate social interaction became dangerous when someone might be reading your lips through the walls. It was during my night shift, 2 weeks into Ephraim's stay, that he told me the thing I'd been dreading. "Your sister died this afternoon," he said gently. "I saw you take the phone call in the medication room at 3:47 p.m. I saw your face when they told you. I saw you mouth the word no 7 times before you started crying. And then I saw you compose yourself, wipe your tears, and go back to work. Because that's what you do. You run from pain by being useful." I wanted to be angry at him for invading that moment, for witnessing my private grief, but I was too tired, too hollowed out. "Yes," I said simply. "She died, and yes, I came back to work because I didn't know what else to do. I also saw what you didn't say on that phone call," Ephraim continued. "When they told you she'd been asking for you in her last hours, and you didn't tell them you'd been avoiding her calls because you couldn't handle watching her die. I saw you mouth the word sorry after you hung up, even though no one was there to hear it. That was the moment I broke. Not because Ephraim had seen my guilt, but because he'd named the thing I couldn't admit to myself. I had failed my sister not through absence, but through presence that was too painful to maintain. I had chosen the comfort of distant duty over the anguish of intimate witness. "I'm telling you this," Ephraim said, "because I see what happens to people who carry that kind of regret. I've watched 50 people in this hospital over the past 2 weeks, seen their private moments, their unspoken guilts, and the ones who don't forgive themselves, who don't find a way to make peace with their failures. They calcify around that guilt. It becomes their identity. Don't let that happen to you." I don't remember much of the rest of that shift. I moved through my duties automatically, checking vitals, distributing medications, documenting behaviors. But Ephraim's words stayed with me, not as an invasion, but as an unexpected gift. He had seen the thing I couldn't say, and had given me permission to acknowledge it. When my shift ended, I didn't go home. I went to the funeral home where my sister's body had been taken, and I sat with her for 2 hours. I told her all the things I'd been too afraid to say while she was alive, all the failures and fears and regrets, and though she couldn't hear me, though it was too late for forgiveness, I felt something shift, some small measure of peace in the acknowledgement of imperfection. When I returned to work the next night, I went directly to Ephraim's room to thank him. But his room was empty. Dr. Halden found me standing in the doorway, staring at the made bed and the absence of personal belongings. "He discharged himself this afternoon," he said quietly, "against medical advice. He said he couldn't stay here anymore, couldn't be around so many people, so many words. He needed to find somewhere quiet, somewhere with fewer faces, fewer conversations to witness." "Where did he go?" "He didn't say. Just packed his things and left, but he left this for you." Dr. Halden handed me an envelope with my name written on it in careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief note. "Nurse Everly, I saw something else I didn't tell you about. That last conversation you had with your sister, 3 weeks before she died. You didn't call her back when she left you a voicemail. But I saw what you did instead. You listened to that voicemail 17 times. You saved it in 3 different places to make sure you'd never lose it. And every time you listened, your lips moved along with her words, memorizing them, keeping her voice alive in the only way you could manage. That counts. Imperfect love is still love. Imperfect goodbye is still goodbye. Forgive yourself. Ephraim." I stood in that empty room, holding that note, and understood something I hadn't before. Ephraim's ability, if it was real, wasn't just an invasion of privacy. It was a terrible intimacy, a forced witness to the small truths and hidden kindnesses that people never acknowledge. He'd seen not just my failure, but also my love. not just my absence, but also my remembering. The research team tried to locate Ephraim after his departure, wanting to continue their studies. But he'd vanished completely, left no forwarding address, no contact information. It was as if he'd deliberately erased himself from all systems, seeking the privacy that he couldn't give others. Over the following months, I occasionally heard rumors. A homeless man in Seattle who'd helped police solve a murder by describing a conversation he claimed to have witnessed through the walls of an apartment building. A volunteer at a deaf community center in Portland who was unusually skilled at lip reading, so skilled that people wondered if he could read minds. A man in a monastery in Northern California who'd taken a vow of silence, who spent his days in a private cell with no windows, seeking escape from the constant visibility of human speech. I don't know if any of those rumors were about Ephraim, but I like to think that he found some measure of peace, some quiet space where the walls were finally opaque and the mouths were finally silent. As for me, I kept working at Riverside Psychiatric Hospital, but something had changed. I became more careful about my private moments, more aware that walls might not provide the privacy we pretend they do. Not because of supernatural abilities or impossible sight, but because privacy is always partially illusory. We're all witnessed more than we realize, by security cameras, by coincidental observers, by the small traces we leave in the world. But I also became more forgiving, both of others and of myself. Because if Ephraim could see through walls, if he could witness the full complexity of human behavior, the failures and the attempts at redemption, and still offer compassion, then perhaps the rest of us could do the same with the limited sight we possess. I still have his note. I keep it in my locker at work, and sometimes during difficult shifts, I take it out and read it. A reminder that someone once saw me at my worst and chose to reflect back not judgment, but understanding. The other day, a new patient was admitted with complaints of unusual perceptual experiences. She claimed she could hear thoughts, not as voices, but as a kind of ambient knowing. The doctors were skeptical, diagnosing it as auditory hallucinations, but I requested to be assigned to her care. Because now I know that sometimes the impossible is just the not yet explained. Sometimes patients aren't delusional, just burdened with abilities the rest of us don't possess. And sometimes the kindest thing we can do is not to cure them, but to witness them, to believe them, and to help them carry the weight of seeing too much. I don't know if Ephraim really could see through walls. The rational part of me still searches for explanations, for tricks or coincidences that could account for his accuracy. But the part of me that sat in that funeral home, finally saying goodbye to my sister, that part knows that some truths don't require proof. Ephraim saw me, really saw me, through walls and defenses and professional composure. And in that seeing, he offered me a gift, the knowledge that even our hidden kindnesses count, that even our imperfect love matters, that even when we fail, we are still trying. And if he's out there somewhere in a quiet place where the walls are finally solid and the faces are finally blurred, I hope he knows that his words reached me, that his invasion of my privacy became an act of grace, that his burden of seeing too much gave me permission to see myself with less harshness. The walls are still thin here at Riverside Psychiatric. Conversations still carry through ventilation systems, shadows still move under doorways, and privacy is still a comfortable fiction. But now I understand that maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Maybe being witnessed, even imperfectly and without permission, is part of what makes us human. Maybe we need someone to see through our walls occasionally, to read the words we mouth when we think no one is watching, to witness both our failures and our attempts at redemption. Maybe that's what Ephraim was trying to tell me all along. That perfect privacy is another word for isolation, and that sometimes the most healing thing we can offer each other is simply this: I see you, All of you, and you are still worthy of compassion. The security system at Riverside Psychiatric Hospital was upgraded 3 months before Naomi Whitcomb was admitted. The new system used keycard access with rotating PIN codes that changed every 48 hours, a protocol designed to prevent unauthorized access and protect patient safety. Only unit staff received the codes, delivered via encrypted text message to our work phones at precisely midnight on rotation days. I had helped design parts of the protocol myself, working with Tobias Reddick from security to ensure the system balanced safety with functionality. We'd spent weeks testing vulnerabilities, considering scenarios where someone might try to breach secure areas. The system we implemented was, by all accounts, foolproof, which is why what happened with Naomi shouldn't have been possible. She was admitted on a Thursday evening, transferred from County General after a suicide attempt. The intake notes described a 34-year-old woman with a history of depression and anxiety, recently divorced, struggling to cope with the isolation of living alone. She'd taken an overdose of sleeping pills but had called 911 herself, changing her mind at the last moment. It was a textbook case, common enough that I felt confident handling her care without unusual precautions. Naomi was slight and soft-spoken, with long brown hair that she kept pulling forward to hide her face. She moved hesitantly, as if uncertain of her right to occupy space, and she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. During the intake interview, she answered questions with minimal detail, offering only what was directly asked. She seemed defeated rather than actively distressed, worn down by life rather than acutely in crisis. "I just want to sleep," she told me when I showed her to her room. "I'm so tired of being awake." "We'll help you rest," I assured her. "You're safe here." She looked at me with eyes that were simultaneously empty and penetrating, as if she were seeing through me to something beyond. "Am I?" she asked. "Are any of us really safe?" It was a philosophical question, not necessarily a sign of paranoia, so I didn't read too much into it. Many patients questioned their safety in those first disorienting hours of admission. I settled her in, provided the standard orientation about unit rules and schedules, and left her to rest. The first unusual incident occurred at 2 a.m. during my routine security check of the unit. I was testing door locks and verifying that all access points were properly secured when I noticed something odd. The medication room door, which should have been locked, was slightly ajar. This was a serious security breach. The medication room contained controlled substances, and protocol required it to be locked at all times when unattended. I immediately checked the access log on the electronic keypad. According to the system, the door had been opened at 1:47 a.m. using a valid keycard and correct PIN code. My keycard. But I had been in a patient's room at 1:47 a.m. responding to a call button. I couldn't have accessed the medication room. I checked my badge holder. My keycard was there, exactly where it should be. I reported the discrepancy to Tobias, who reviewed the security footage. The video showed me approaching the medication room at 1:47 a.m., swiping my card, entering the PIN, and opening the door. Except I could prove I had been elsewhere at that exact time, visible on another camera helping a patient. "Could be a system glitch," Tobias said, though he looked troubled. "The timestamp might have recorded wrong, but I'll flag it for investigation." The next night, it happened again. This time, the secure filing room was accessed at 3:23 a.m. using the correct rotating PIN code, which had changed just hours earlier at midnight. I was the only night nurse on duty, and I'd been in the nursing station at that time, visible on 3 different cameras. "Someone's duplicating your card," Tobias concluded. "They must have gotten access to your badge, cloned it somehow. We need to issue you a new one immediately." But when he reviewed who had been in proximity to me over the past few days, The only people close enough to clone my badge were staff members with their own valid access. It didn't make sense for any of them to risk their careers by stealing another person's credentials. I was issued a new keycard with a unique encryption code, something that supposedly couldn't be duplicated. For one night, the unauthorized access stopped. Then, on the third night after Naomi's admission, it happened again. This time it was the emergency exit door, accessed at 4:12 a.m. The alarm should have sounded, but the system had been properly disarmed using the correct override code. A code that only 3 people knew: me, Tobias, and the unit supervisor, Evelyn Caro. "This is impossible," Tobias said, his frustration evident. "The encryption on these new cards can't be cloned with any commercially available technology, and the override codes aren't written down anywhere. They're memorized only. Could someone have hacked the system remotely? The system isn't connected to the internet. It's a closed network, physically isolated. There's no way to hack it from outside the building." We were discussing this at the nurse's station when Naomi shuffled past, returning from the bathroom. She moved like a ghost, barely making sound, and neither of us noticed her until she was right beside us. "Excuse me," she said in that whisper-soft voice. "I'm having trouble sleeping again. Could I have something to help?" I prepared a dose of trazodone, signing it out from the medication room while Tobias watched to ensure I properly secured the door afterward. Naomi took the medication with a small, knowing smile that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't articulate why. "You changed your code," she said as I handed her the water cup. "What?" "Your PIN for the doors. You changed it today. The old one was 748291. The new one is 291748, just the reverse. You thought it would be easier to remember that way." I felt my blood go cold. The new rotating code had been sent to my phone just hours ago. I hadn't written it down, hadn't said it aloud. And she was right. I had reversed my old code because the numbers were familiar. "How do you know that?" I asked. She tilted her head, studying me. "The same way I know that the emergency exit code is 0325, that Tobias's personal phone password is his daughter's birthday backwards, and that you hide a spare keycard in your locker taped to the inside of the door because you're afraid of losing the primary one." Tobias stood up, his hand moving toward his radio. "Miss Whitcomb, how do you have this information?" "I don't know," she said, and for the first time emotion crept into her voice. "Fear. I've been trying to figure that out. It's why I took those pills. I thought if I could just stop existing, stop being awake, maybe I'd stop knowing things I shouldn't know. But it doesn't work that way. Even unconscious, I knew what the paramedics were saying about me. I knew the code to the medication lockbox at County General. I knew which nurses were planning to quit, which doctors were having affairs, every password and security measure and secret protocol in that entire hospital. And I know them here too, all of them." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, handing it to me. On it was written a series of numbers and codes, along with brief descriptions. North Entrance Security Override, Staff Elevator Maintenance Bypass, Pharmaceutical Storage Vault Combination, Director's Office Safe Code. I checked 3 of them later that shift. All were correct. Dr. Honora Kincaid was called in for an emergency consultation. She interviewed Naomi for 2 hours, while Tobias and I waited outside, trying to make sense of what was happening. "It has to be insider information," Tobias insisted. "Someone on staff is feeding her this information. Maybe one of her family members works here?" We checked. No connections. She's never worked here, never visited, has no relatives employed by the hospital. Then she's hacking somehow. There has to be a rational explanation. But when Dr. Kincaid emerged from the interview, Her expression suggested the explanation wasn't rational at all. "She has no idea how she knows these things," Dr. Kincaid said. "She describes it as information that simply appears in her mind, particularly related to security systems and access protocols. She says it started about 6 months ago, gradually intensifying. At first, she thought she was remembering passwords she'd seen someone type. But then she started knowing codes for places she'd never been, systems she'd never observed." "It's impossible," Tobias said flatly. "I'm aware. But she's demonstrated accurate knowledge of security information she couldn't possibly have accessed through normal means. We need to consider that we're dealing with something outside our standard diagnostic framework." Over the next several days, we conducted tests. Careful, controlled tests designed to determine the limits of Naomi's knowledge. She could accurately describe the rotating PIN codes before they were sent to staff phones. She knew when the codes would change, down to the minute. She could describe the layout of secure areas she'd never entered, including details like the color of filing cabinets and the brands of locks used. But her knowledge had boundaries. She didn't know personal information about staff unless it was related to security or access. She couldn't read minds or predict the future. Her unusual awareness seemed specifically limited to security systems, access protocols, and anything related to controlling or restricting access to spaces. "It's like I'm connected to every lock in the building," she tried to explain during one session. "I can feel them, sense their codes and combinations. When someone changes a password, I know it before they finish typing. When a new security measure is installed, I understand how it works immediately. It's not just this hospital either. When I pass other buildings, I know their security systems too. Banks, government offices, private homes, every locked door is transparent to me." The implications were staggering. If what Naomi claimed was true, she represented a massive security vulnerability. She couldn't be trusted in any facility with confidential information or valuable assets. But more disturbingly, she clearly wasn't using her ability maliciously. She'd come to the hospital seeking help, trying to escape knowledge she found burdensome rather than advantageous. "I don't want to know these things," she told me one night, tears running down her face. "Do you know what it's like to walk down a street and know that you could break into any building, bypass any alarm, access any secure area? To know that you're a threat to everyone's safety just by existing. That's why I tried to end it, because I don't want to be a danger. I don't want this responsibility." The hospital administration held emergency meetings. Security experts were consulted. Psychologists, neurologists, and even a few academics who specialized in unusual cognitive phenomena were brought in to evaluate Naomi. Some insisted it had to be fraud, an elaborate trick to gain attention or sympathy. Others proposed exotic neurological explanations, theories about enhanced pattern recognition or savant-like abilities. But none of them could explain how she knew codes that hadn't been created yet, or how she described the contents of sealed envelopes containing new security protocols, or how she accurately predicted the exact minute when the next rotating code would be generated. "We have to transfer her," the hospital director said during one meeting. "We can't maintain security with a patient who knows every access code." "Transfer her where?" Dr. Kincaid asked. "Any facility will have the same problem, and ethically, we can't simply discharge a suicidal patient because she's inconvenient." "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest we try to help her. That's what we're here for." I volunteered to work with Naomi, partly out of professional duty but mostly out of fascination. She was unlike any patient I'd encountered, and I wanted to understand not just what she could do, but why it distressed her so deeply. During our sessions, she revealed more about her experience. The knowledge wasn't constant. It came in waves, particularly when she was anxious or stressed. Being near security systems intensified it. Sometimes she could push the information away, distract herself with other thoughts. But it always returned, an intrusive awareness she couldn't fully escape. "You changed your access code again," she told me one evening. "But you're nervous about it because you're not good at remembering numbers. You wrote it down on a piece of paper and hid it in your pocket. You're planning to memorize it tonight and destroy the paper tomorrow." She was right. I'd done exactly that. "How?" I asked, pulling the folded paper from my pocket. "How do you know?" "I can feel you worrying about it," she said. "It's like your anxiety creates a signature around the information. The more you try to protect a secret, the more visible it becomes to me. That's why security systems are so clear. They're designed to be protected, which makes them obvious." "Does it work with other secrets? Things that aren't related to security?" "Sometimes. If someone is anxious about keeping something hidden, I can sense it. But it's not specific information, more like a general awareness that there's something they're protecting. Like right now, you're protecting something besides the door code. Something about your sister." I'd been careful not to discuss my sister at work since her death. It was too raw, too personal, but Naomi had somehow sensed that hidden grief. "I don't want to know your secrets," she said quickly, seeing my expression. "I'm not trying to invade your privacy, it just happens, like background noise I can't turn off." Over the following week, Naomi's condition deteriorated. The constant awareness of security vulnerabilities, combined with the knowledge that she herself was a security risk, pushed her deeper into depression. She stopped eating properly, withdrew from group therapy, and spent most of her time in her room, eyes closed, trying to block out the information flooding her mind. And then came the night that changed everything. I was doing my rounds at 2 a.m. when the power failed. Not just flickered, but failed completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, but all the electronic security systems went down. The keycard readers went dark. The electronic locks disengaged, reverting to manual mode. "Fire in the electrical room," Tobias's voice came over the radio. "All staff, initiate lockdown protocol. Secure all patients manually." I ran to the unit's main door, ready to engage the manual lock, but something made me detour to Naomi's room first. Some instinct that told me this wasn't a coincidence. Her room was empty. The window was open, screen removed. She'd climbed out during the chaos of the power failure, using the 60 seconds of system vulnerability to escape. We found her 3 hours later in the hospital's basement, in the electrical room where the fire had started. She was sitting against the wall, smoke-stained and exhausted, holding a fire extinguisher. "I'm sorry," she said when we found her. "I had to make sure no one got hurt." "You started the fire?" Tobias asked, incredulous. "No, but I knew it was going to happen. I've been feeling something building in the electrical system for days, some kind of fault in the wiring. I tried to tell maintenance, but how could I explain that I just knew? They would have thought I was delusional, so tonight, when I felt it reaching critical point, I climbed out and came down here. I got here just as it started. I put it out before it could spread." The fire marshal's investigation confirmed that there had been a serious electrical fault, one that could have caused a catastrophic fire if left unchecked. Naomi's intervention had potentially saved lives, but she'd also demonstrated that she could bypass our security measures whenever she chose, that she'd been staying in the locked unit voluntarily, not because we could contain her, but because she decided to stay. "You could have left at any time," I said, when we were alone in her room later that morning. "You've known every access code since the day you arrived. Why stay?" "Because I'm sick," she said simply. "Not delusional, not psychotic, but sick in a way that doctors don't have a name for. I know too much, and it's killing me. I thought maybe here someone could help me figure out how to live with it, how to know everyone's secrets without destroying myself with the weight of them. Did we help? She smiled sadly. You tried. That's more than anyone else has done. But I don't think there's a treatment for knowing what I know. I think I just have to learn to carry it, the way people with chronic pain learn to carry their discomfort. It doesn't go away, but maybe it becomes bearable. Naomi was discharged 2 weeks later. Not because she was cured, but because there was nothing more we could do for her in an institutional setting. Dr. Kincaid arranged for outpatient therapy and provided her with coping strategies for managing intrusive thoughts, though we all knew those strategies were designed for typical intrusive thoughts, not for accurate knowledge of security systems. "Where will you go?" I asked her on her last day. "Somewhere rural," she said. "Somewhere with fewer buildings, fewer locks, fewer security systems. Maybe if I'm surrounded by open spaces, the noise will be quieter. And if someone tries to exploit your ability, if someone realizes what you can do, then I'll disappear. I'm good at that now. I know every security system, every surveillance camera, every monitored checkpoint. If I need to vanish, I can vanish completely." She left me with a warning, written on a slip of paper. "Your spare key card in your locker, the one you think is secret, the administration knows about it. They installed a camera inside your locker 3 days ago. They're watching to see if you're the security leak. They suspect you because of my knowledge. You might want to remove the card before they use it as evidence against you." I checked. She was right. There was a tiny camera, newly installed, pointed at my spare keycard. I removed the card and reported the camera to HR, claiming I'd noticed it during routine locker maintenance. An investigation was launched into who had authorized the surveillance without my knowledge. The whole situation became complicated and political, but I was cleared of any wrongdoing. Naomi had protected me, used her unusual knowledge to warn me of a threat I couldn't have seen coming, just as she'd protected the hospital by preventing the electrical fire. 6 months later, I received a postcard. No return address, postmarked from a small town in Montana. On the back, in handwriting I recognized as Naomi's, was a single sentence. "The noise is quieter here, but I still know when you change your codes. Stay safe." I kept that postcard in my locker, a reminder that security is always partially illusory, that every system has vulnerabilities, every protection has blind spots, but also a reminder that unusual abilities, even frightening ones, don't necessarily indicate malicious intent. The hospital upgraded its security systems again after Naomi's discharge, implementing new protocols that were supposedly immune to the kind of knowledge she possessed. But I knew better. If Naomi wanted to access our facility, she could. Every lock we installed, every code we created, every safeguard we implemented would be transparent to her. The fact that she chose not to exploit that knowledge, that she instead used it to protect rather than harm, said more about her character than any psychiatric evaluation could have revealed. I think about her sometimes during those long night shifts when I'm testing door locks and verifying security protocols. I think about how burdensome it must be to know everyone's defenses, to see through every protection people construct around their private spaces and information, to be unable to give people the privacy they need, the security they deserve. And I think about the choice she made, to seek help rather than exploitation, to warn rather than threaten, to disappear into quiet spaces rather than use her ability for personal gain. The last security code update included a note in the system that only appeared for a moment before being automatically deleted. 773281. You're still reversing your old codes. Try something more random. N. She was still watching, still aware. But instead of feeling threatened, I felt oddly protected. Because if Naomi could see our security vulnerabilities, she could also see threats we missed. and she'd proven that she would warn us rather than harm us. I changed my code to something truly random that day, but I also left a brief note in my locker, knowing she might somehow see it. Thank you for watching over us. Stay well wherever you are. I don't know if she saw it. I don't know if she's still monitoring our systems from whatever rural refuge she found. But I like to think that somewhere out there, someone with impossible knowledge is using it not to breach our security, but to guard it. And maybe that's the real lesson of Naomi Whitcomb. That knowing too much isn't necessarily dangerous. It's what we choose to do with that knowledge that defines us. She could have been a threat. Instead, she chose to be a guardian, even when it cost her everything to do so. There are moments in psychiatric nursing when you realize that the boundary between caregiver and patient, between observer and observed, is thinner than you'd like to believe. The night Silas Pendry quoted my mother's last letter to me, word for word, was one of those moments. He'd been admitted on a Friday evening, brought in by police after being found wandering through a residential neighborhood, looking into windows, not breaking in, not attempting entry, just standing in yards and staring into lit windows as if searching for something. When questioned, he'd been cooperative but confused, unable to explain what he was looking for or why he was there. Silas was 47 years old, tall and thin, with graying hair and glasses that magnified his pale blue eyes. He had the manner of a librarian or academic, soft-spoken and precise in his word choice. His intake paperwork described a recent job loss, increasing social isolation, and what his sister called an obsession with other people's lives. He's always been a little odd, his sister had told the intake coordinator. But lately, it's gotten worse. He talks about people he's never met as if he knows them intimately. He describes their homes, their routines, their private moments. It's like he's been stalking them, but he never leaves his apartment. I finally got scared enough to call for help when he started talking about my own life. Things that happened in my house when he wasn't there, conversations I had in private. It's like he can see through walls. During the intake interview, Silas had been pleasant and articulate, showing no signs of acute psychosis or aggression. When asked about the window-looking behavior, he'd shrugged apologetically. I was trying to find something I lost, he'd said. I thought it might be in one of those houses, but I couldn't quite remember which house, so I was checking them all. What did you lose? Dr. Kincaid had asked. A letter, Silas replied. A very important letter. From someone who's gone now. The last words they wrote. I kept it safe for years, but recently I realized I couldn't remember where I put it. And then I started seeing it in my mind, but not in my apartment. In someone else's home. Under a bed, in a wooden box, wrapped in blue tissue paper. I've been trying to find which home, so I can ask for it back. It was a sad delusion, the kind that often accompanied grief and loss. We admitted him for observation and evaluation, standard protocol for someone experiencing a break from reality that had led to concerning behavior. I was assigned to his care, taking over the night shift monitoring. Silas was given a room in the quiet wing, away from more acute patients. He settled in without complaint, accepting his medication, following unit rules, engaging politely when spoken to but otherwise keeping to himself. The first 3 nights were unremarkable. Silas slept well, ate adequately, attended group therapy sessions without causing disruption. He spoke little about his delusion, seeming to accept that we were there to help him. The only unusual behavior was his habit of staring at staff members for long periods, his eyes unfocused, as if he were looking at something beyond them. On the 4th night, during my midnight rounds, I found him awake and sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall with that distant expression. "Trouble sleeping, Mr. Pendry?" I asked quietly. He turned to look at me, and his eyes focused with sudden intensity. "You have my letter. he said. "I've been trying to figure out which house, and now I know. It's yours. In your bedroom, under your bed, in a wooden box that used to belong to your grandmother. The box with the brass latch that sticks. Inside, wrapped in blue tissue paper, is a letter. My letter." I felt a chill run down my spine. I did have a wooden box under my bed, inherited from my grandmother. The brass latch did stick, and inside that box, wrapped in tissue paper, were several personal items, including letters from deceased family members. "Mr. Pendry, I don't have any letters that belong to you. You're confused." "Not your letters," he said patiently. "My letter, the one my mother wrote to me before she died. I kept it safe for 20 years, but somehow it ended up in your box. I know it sounds impossible, but I can see it there. Can see the handwriting, the date at the top, even the coffee stain in the lower right corner where I set my cup down while reading it the first time. Your mother's letter is in your possession, not mine. This is part of your confusion." He shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. I'm not delusional. I wish I were. That would be easier. But I can see things that are hidden. Personal things, private things. Things people keep in boxes and drawers and secret places. And for some reason, I can see that my mother's letter is in your box. I don't know how it got there, but it's there." I tried to redirect the conversation, to focus on his feelings rather than his delusion. But as I talked with him, he began describing other things in my box. The photograph of my sister taken 2 weeks before she died. The bracelet my father gave me for my 16th birthday. The newspaper clipping about a high school friend who'd died in a car accident. Every item he mentioned was real. Every detail was accurate. "How do you know these things?" I asked, my professional composure cracking. "I don't know," he said, and his voice carried genuine distress. "It started about 6 months ago. I began seeing flashes of hidden things, objects tucked away in private spaces. At first I thought they were memories, things I'd seen and forgotten. But then I started seeing things I'd never encountered, in homes I'd never entered. And always they were personal items. Letters, photographs, journals, keepsakes. The things people hide away because they're too precious or too painful to look at regularly. Can you see these things for everyone? Not everyone. Only certain people. And I don't understand the pattern. It's not random, but it's not based on proximity either. Sometimes I'll see hidden objects belonging to someone I've never met. Sometimes I'm near someone all day and see nothing. There's a connection I don't understand. Some thread that links me to particular people's private spaces. Over the next several days, I tried to maintain professional distance while dealing with the unsettling reality that Silas knew things he shouldn't know. I consulted with Dr. Kincaid, who was as puzzled as I was. "He's described accurate details about my home office as well," she told me. "Things I keep in my desk drawer. Nothing criminal or particularly shameful, but private nonetheless. I'm at a loss to explain how he has this information." We considered the usual explanations. That Silas had somehow researched us online, found our addresses, broken into our homes to gather information. But security checks of our properties showed no signs of forced entry. And Silas's sister confirmed he'd barely left his apartment in months. Moreover, the things he described weren't visible in our homes. They were hidden in closed boxes and locked drawers. "It's like his delusion has somehow intersected with reality," Dr. Kincaid said. "Or he has access to information through means we don't understand." On the 8th night of his admission, Silas asked to speak with me privately. We sat in a consultation room, the door open per protocol, and he looked at me with an expression of deep sadness. "I need to tell you about the letter," he said. "My mother's letter. Not because I want to invade your privacy, but because I think you need to know what it says. And I think somehow you were meant to have it. Mr. Pendry, I don't have your letter. Please, just listen. The letter is dated March 14, 2003. It starts with, "My dearest Silas, my mother was dying of cancer, and she wrote to me one last time before the pain became too much for her to hold a pen. She wrote about regrets and forgiveness, about the things she wished she'd said when she had more time, about how much easier it is to love someone from a distance than to love them up close, with all their flaws visible." He paused, his eyes filling with tears. She wrote, "I wasn't always the mother you needed, but I was always the mother who loved you. And I hope that when I'm gone, you'll remember that love is often imperfect, but no less real for its imperfection. I hope you'll forgive me for the times I failed you, and I hope you'll forgive yourself for the times you believed my failures meant you were unlovable." I felt my breath catch, not because of his mother's words, but because they echoed something my own mother had written to me before her death. A different letter, different words, but the same theme of imperfect love and the need for forgiveness. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I think you have a similar letter, from someone who loved you imperfectly and wanted you to know it was still love. And I think you keep it hidden because it's too painful to look at, but too precious to destroy. Just like I did with my mother's letter." He was right. My mother's final letter to me, written in her hospital room 3 days before she died, was in the box under my bed. I'd read it once, at her funeral, and then wrapped it carefully and put it away. It had been 5 years, and I still couldn't bear to read it again. "Mr. Pendry, even if what you're saying is true, even if you can somehow see hidden objects, why would your letter be in my house? That doesn't make sense." "I know it doesn't, but I've been thinking about it, trying to understand the pattern of what I see. And I think, maybe, I'm not seeing physical objects. Maybe I'm seeing emotional objects. The letter I'm looking for isn't the physical piece of paper my mother wrote on. It's the message, the meaning, the love and regret and forgiveness it contained. And maybe that message exists in your box too, in your mother's words to you. Maybe what I've been seeing all along isn't my specific letter, but the universal letter that parents write to their children when they know they're running out of time." It was a profound insight, one that suggested Silas wasn't delusional but rather experiencing something more complex. A kind of emotional synesthesia, perhaps, where he perceived not physical objects but the meanings attached to them. Dr. Kincaid brought in a specialist in unusual perceptual phenomena, a neuropsychologist from the university who studied cases of enhanced empathy and emotional intuition. After extensive testing, she proposed a theory. "Mr. Pendry appears to have developed what I'd call effective remote viewing," she explained. "He's not seeing physical objects through some supernatural means. Rather, he's picking up on emotional residue, the psychological imprints that significant objects leave on people. When he sees a letter hidden in a box, what he's actually perceiving is the emotional weight that person carries related to letters and loss and unresolved grief. His mind interprets this emotional data as visual information about hidden objects. But he describes accurate physical details," I pointed out. "The brass latch on my box, the blue tissue paper. How does he know those specifics?" "Probability and pattern recognition likely. He's unconsciously picking up on typical ways people store precious items. Then his mind fills in details that are statistically likely to be accurate. The brass latch is a common feature on antique boxes. Blue tissue paper is traditional for protecting delicate items. He's not seeing your specific box, he's constructing a probable box based on psychological profiling." It was a rational explanation, but it didn't fully satisfy, because Silas continued to provide details that seemed too specific to be statistical guesses. On the 12th night, things took a darker turn. I arrived for my shift to find Silas in acute distress, pacing his room and muttering to himself. When I entered to check on him, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "It's not there anymore," he said urgently. "The letter. It's gone from your box. Someone took it, or you moved it, or something happened. And now I can't find it anywhere. I've been searching all the hidden places I can see, but it's vanished." I gently extracted my arm from his grip. "Mr. Pendry, I need you to calm down. No one has taken anything from you. You don't understand. The letter, the meaning of it, it's disappearing. Not just from your box, but from the world. Like the message is being erased. And I think it means someone is dying. Someone is losing their chance to say the words that need to be said, to offer the forgiveness that's needed. I can feel it slipping away." His distress was genuine and deep. We administered emergency medication to calm him, and he eventually fell into an exhausted sleep. But his words haunted me. That night, after my shift, I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I went home, pulled the wooden box from under my bed, and opened it. My mother's letter was there, exactly where I'd left it, wrapped in tissue paper. I unfolded it with trembling hands and read her words again. "My dearest Marin, I wasn't always the mother you needed, but I was always the mother who loved you. I hope that when I'm gone, you'll remember that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. I hope you'll forgive me for the times I failed you, and forgive yourself for the times you couldn't save me. You tried so hard, my beautiful girl. You tried harder than I deserved. And I want you to know that I see that. I've always seen it, even when I was too sick and scared to say so. Love is often expressed imperfectly, but that doesn't make it less true. Please carry this with you, and please, please let yourself be happy. You don't have to earn the right to joy. It's yours simply because you exist." I wept as I read, not from fresh grief but from recognition. My mother had been difficult, her mental illness making her unpredictable and sometimes cruel. I'd spent my adult life trying to reconcile the mother who hurt me with the mother who loved me, trying to forgive her without forgetting the pain. And here, in her final words, she'd given me permission to hold both truths, the love and the pain, the forgiveness and the memory, the imperfection and the sincerity. The next morning, I brought the letter with me to work. Not the original, but a photocopy, something I could share without risking the precious original. I showed it to Silas during a private session. "Is this the letter you've been seeing?" I asked. He read it slowly, his eyes moving over each word with care. When he finished, he looked up with tears in his eyes. "No," he said. "This isn't my mother's letter. The words are different, the handwriting is different, the specific message is unique to you and your mother. But yes, this is what I've been seeing. Not the paper, not the ink, but the meaning. The universal truth that parents and children love each other imperfectly, hurt each other sometimes, and desperately need to forgive and be forgiven before time runs out. Your mother's letter said something similar? Almost exactly. Different words, same harmonière." And I realized, after losing the physical letter, that what I was really looking for wasn't the paper. It was permission to forgive her and myself. Permission to accept that our love was real even though it was complicated. Over the following weeks, Silas's condition stabilized. His distress decreased as he came to understand that what he was experiencing wasn't a supernatural ability or a delusion, but rather an intense form of empathy. He was perceiving the emotional landscapes of other people, particularly their hidden griefs and unresolved losses, and his mind was translating that emotional data into visual metaphors of hidden objects. "Everyone carries hidden things," he explained to me one day. tucked away in boxes under beds, in drawers, in the backs of closets. Not just physical objects, but emotional truths. Regrets, forgiveness needed and not yet offered. Love expressed too late or not at all. I'm somehow sensitive to those hidden truths, and my brain shows them to me as if they were physical objects I could find and retrieve. But they're not really retrievable, are they? Once someone dies, once time passes, those opportunities are gone. All we can do is make peace with what was left unsaid. Dr. Kincaid arranged for Silas to work with a therapist who specialized in complicated grief and helped him develop coping strategies for managing his unusual empathy. He learned to recognize when he was perceiving someone else's emotional pain and to respect those perceptions without feeling obligated to act on them. Before his discharge, Silas asked to speak with me one final time. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I saw in your hidden places, but I held back from mentioning until I understood it better." I braced myself, uncertain what else he might have perceived about my private life. "There's another letter," he said gently. "One you haven't written yet. To your sister, the one who died. You've been carrying words for her for years, things you wish you'd said, apologies and confessions and expressions of love. You keep thinking you'll write them down someday, in a letter you'll read at her grave or burn as a ritual of release. But you haven't done it yet because you're afraid that once you write those words, once you make them real, you'll have to truly let her go." He was right. I'd been composing a letter to my sister in my head for 3 years, adding to it regularly but never putting pen to paper. I'm telling you this not to invade your privacy but to encourage you. Write the letter, not because it will bring her back or change what happened, but because you deserve to release those words. They're weighing you down, keeping you tethered to grief in a way that isn't healthy. The letter you write won't be perfect, just like your mother's letter wasn't perfect, just like my mother's letter wasn't perfect. But it will be real, and that's enough. After Silas was discharged, I went home and did as he suggested. I wrote the letter to my sister, all the things I'd been carrying for 3 years. It took hours, and I cried through most of it. But when I finished, I felt lighter. I didn't burn the letter or read it at her grave. I folded it, wrapped it in tissue paper, and placed it in the wooden box under my bed, next to my mother's letter. 2 objects, 2 expressions of imperfect love, 2 pieces of unfinished emotional business. But now, instead of avoiding the box, I opened it occasionally, reading those letters as reminders that love doesn't have to be perfect to matter. A month after Silas's discharge, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a letter, written in careful handwriting on lined paper. "Dear Nurse Everly, I wanted you to know that I found my mother's letter. Not the physical paper, which was destroyed years ago in a move I'd forgotten about, but the meaning of it, the message she was trying to convey. I found that. It was in your box, and in Dr. Kincaid's drawer, and in the hidden spaces of dozens of other people I encountered. It was everywhere I looked, because the truth she wrote to me is universal. Parents love their children imperfectly. Children love their parents with complexity. And when we're brave enough to acknowledge both the love and the pain, to forgive without forgetting, and to remember without drowning in regret, we find a kind of peace. Thank you for sharing your mother's letter with me. Thank you for being brave enough to write the letter to your sister. And thank you for understanding that what I see in people's hidden places isn't a violation of privacy, but a recognition of shared humanity. We all carry these hidden things. We're all trying to make peace with imperfect love. Some of us just happen to be able to see it in others. Be well, Silas." I kept his letter with the others in the wooden box. 3 letters now. 3 expressions of the same truth. Love is imperfect. Forgiveness is necessary. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is acknowledge the weight of what we carry in our hidden places. I still work the night shift at Riverside Psychiatric Hospital, and sometimes, when I'm checking on patients in the quiet hours before dawn, I think about Silas and his unusual empathy, about how he perceived not physical objects but emotional truths, and how he taught me that what we hide away isn't really hidden at all. It's just waiting for us to be ready to face it. The wooden box is still under my bed. I've added more letters to it over the years, letters to people I've lost and letters to versions of myself I've outgrown. Each one an acknowledgement of imperfection, a small act of forgiveness, a recognition that love is messy and complicated and real. And I've learned that Silas was right about something else too. The letter he was looking for, the one he thought was lost, was never in any specific location. It was in the space between what was said and what was left unsaid, in the gap between what we wish we'd done and what we actually did. It was in the universal human experience of loving imperfectly and seeking forgiveness for that imperfection. We all carry these hidden things, these letters and losses and unresolved griefs. We tuck them away in boxes under beds, in drawers, in the corners of our minds. And maybe, like Silas, we're all searching for something we've lost, something we hope to find in an unexpected place. But what I learned from Silas Pendry is that what we're really searching for isn't a physical object or a perfect resolution. It's permission. Permission to forgive ourselves and others. Permission to accept that love doesn't have to be flawless to be real. Permission to open the boxes under our beds and face what we've hidden there, not with shame, but with compassion. The other night, I opened my box again and found something I didn't remember placing there. A small slip of paper tucked between the letters with a single line written in unfamiliar handwriting. The hidden things are only heavy if we never look at them. Thank you for looking. SP. I don't know how it got there. I don't know if Silas somehow found a way to place it in my box, or if I'm imagining things, or if perhaps I wrote it myself and forgot. But it doesn't matter. The message is true regardless of its origin. The hidden things are only heavy if we never look at them. So I look. Not obsessively, not constantly, but regularly enough to remember that what's in that box is part of my story. The imperfect love, the unfinished business, the words said too late or not at all. They're all there, waiting not to be resolved, but to be acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, in the simple act of looking at what we've hidden, we find a kind of freedom. Not freedom from the past, but freedom to carry it differently. Lighter, with less shame and more compassion. Silas Pendry taught me that lesson, though I suspect he learned it from his own journey. From losing a letter and finding its meaning everywhere he looked. From seeing hidden things in other people's lives and recognizing his own hidden things reflected back. We're all carrying something. We're all hiding something under our beds, in our drawers, in the private spaces we pretend no one else can see. And maybe we're all, in our own ways, trying to find the courage to open those boxes and face what we've stored there. The wooden box is under my bed. The brass latch still sticks. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, are letters and photographs and small precious things. And every time I open it, I'm reminded that what I'm really opening isn't a box, but a door. A door to the past, to the pain, to the imperfect love that shaped me. And on the other side of that door isn't resolution or closure or perfect peace. It's just understanding, just acceptance, just the recognition that I loved and was loved, imperfectly but truly. That's the real letter Silas was looking for. Not the words his mother wrote, but the truth those words contained. And he found it not in any single location, but everywhere. In my box, in Dr. Kincaid's drawer, in the hidden places of everyone he encountered. The letter was always there. We just had to be ready to read it. And now, Every night when I come home from my shift and see the wooden box under my bed, I smile, because I know what's inside isn't a burden anymore. It's a reminder, a message from the past that says, "You are loved imperfectly. You have loved imperfectly, and that's enough. That's always been enough." Thank you, Silas, for helping me see that, for teaching me that sometimes the things we hide away are exactly the things we need to face, and that facing them with courage and compassion is how we finally find what we've been looking for all along. Not a letter, not an object, not a resolution. Just peace with imperfection, just forgiveness for ourselves and others, just the simple truth that love, however flawed, is always real. And that truth is worth keeping, in a wooden box under a bed, in a drawer, in the private spaces where we store our most precious and painful things. Worth keeping, worth remembering, and yes, worth opening, again and again and again. Because the hidden things are only heavy if we never look at them.